Well, welcome to the Decarb Connect podcast. And this week, I am so pleased to be joined by Dr. Nicola Kimm, who is a real powerhouse in the sustainability field, a member of the Board of Management, Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer, and all-round decarbonisation and sustainability leader at Heidelberg Materials. So, Nicola, thank you so much for making time to join us. I've been looking forward to this immensely.
Thank you, Alex. Really looking forward to it as well.
So I've given that kind of light touch introduction to you and who you are, but could you help the audience, I guess, understand a little bit about how you've arrived at this point of time, both from personal and professional drivers? Like, what is it that's driven you into this role, into this position in industry?
Yeah, so I grew up in Canada and I studied ecology originally, but then I really wanted to be in a position to influence industry, to shape transformation in an industrial environment. And so I followed it up with a chemical engineering degree. And that brought me to various roles in different countries. I did R&D, operations, communications, later did a PhD on circular economy in the chemical industry. And that really helped my transition to sustainability. And then from the chemical industry, I transitioned to different industries. So to food, to bio-based chemicals, to electronics, now to construction materials, and always taking best practices in sustainability from industry to industry. And I found this extremely motivational to be in industries which are in transformation and where you can really shape the company strategy and the company value proposition.
And so how long have you now been in the chief sustainability role at Heidelberg?
Yeah, so I've been in this role for 3 years, and the role it's as you said, it's a CSO role, but it covers quite a broad scope. I have 4 teams. One team is focused on sustainability strategy and implementation, so the reporting and the target setting and the measuring the progress. The second team, which is the largest team, is driving our global R&D activities, because it's really through R&D that we implement sustainability and we can reach our targets by changing the product composition and changing the processes. The third team is all about technology related to carbon capture, because in order for us to ultimately reach net zero, we need also carbon capture as a means to do that. And that is the third team. And then finally, the fourth team is called Innovation Hub, and that's all about scaling innovative products and primarily related to either carbon reduction or circularity. So there's that business component where we work with the countries, work with the businesses to scale these innovative solutions.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that structure actually, because it's always been interesting to me that cement and construction materials really seem to be leading from the front in terms of how they're pursuing decarbonisation, how they're structuring their business. But we'll come back to this cement and construction sector in a moment. One of the things I was interested about you is that you have this element of your role about being a member of the board of management. You're also managing these 4 different teams, but how do those roles intertwine? Like what's the day-to-day like versus what's the kind of year-round rhythm with those different priorities?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the board role as such. So 3 years ago, Heidelberg Materials decided to launch a transformational strategy. So they placed sustainability and digitalization at board level to help drive this new strategy. And in fact, Heidelberg Materials was the first company in the German stock exchange to have a dedicated sustainability role in the board. And this role allows me to bring sustainability really to board discussions, strategic decisions around CapEx allocation, around merger and acquisition, around integrating it in all of our decision making. And when you ask, how does it intertwine with day-to-day operations? So I have a role where I have to work deeply with my team on topics related to R&D projects or product development and sustainability topics like creating a materiality matrix. So I have to work deeply, but then at the same time have the overall big picture and see that the work that we're doing fits in with the direction we want to go in as a company overall. And there also the linkage to the countries is very important. So working with the general managers leading the countries to make sure that sustainability is really integrated in everything that we do, also the customer conversation and day-to-day operations. So it's very much a combination of engagement across the organization, dealing with deep topics in my team, but then also seeing the broader picture together with the board.
Okay, great. So that's given us this really good context for you and your lens on things. But another question before we'll then go into construction, cement sector, and it's the way that it's tackling decarbonisation. You've had this really immense experience over a decade in sustainability roles, which is pretty unusual, actually. If I think about our member companies, a lot of the sustainability leaders, the CSOs or SVPs that are in role are often have really come into this in the last 3 or 5 years. You've had this kind of longer timeline of really sort of championing sustainability. What's changed? When you think back, a decade ago in sustainability is kind of like, I don't know, 50 years ago in other roles somehow, isn't it? There's been so much change, but what's been your perspective on that? What have you noticed in that time in terms of how the function in particular has changed?
Yeah, a lot has changed. And more than 10 years ago, it was very much a specialist function. And now I think the most impactful change is that it's so connected to the overall company, and it's so much more a board and also supervisory board topic. And this means that, yeah, the skills needed by the sustainability team have changed. It's much more about influencing different parts of the organization. And it's also much more about dealing with new regulations and reporting obligations. So, and that means that different parts of the organization are involved, and the great demand on data accuracy and reporting and showing progress. So I think the pressure on companies to deliver on sustainability has of course increased substantially, and with that also, its strategic importance and how companies prioritize it. So a lot has changed, and I think it's been integrated so much more in the value proposition in the business. It's not a regulatory risk topic anymore, but so much more an opportunity and business collaboration topic.
Oh, well, let's turn our attention then to the cement sector, part of the obviously construction materials sector. I think people who listen to this podcast or who are, reading around in the field of industrial decarbonisation will already know that as a sector, really by volume of product used, it generates 7%, this immense stat, 7% of global CO2. But as I said at the beginning, it's also, the team at Decarb, we really notice that as a sector, it is often out front. It is, it's the sector we see the most of and hear the most from, alongside perhaps steel, I think also. What are you seeing actually happening in terms of the action in the sector? We've covered some of the kind of road mapping of other companies before, but what's your sort of sense of what's really going on and what's happening in the sector right now?
There's a huge focus on the hard to abate industries currently. So when I attended COP in December in Dubai last year, you saw that the attention to these hard to abate industries has not only increased, but it's much more positive in the sense that we have technical solutions to change these industries and to drive transformation. So society wants resilient, sustainable, smart buildings and infrastructure, and that relies on sustainable steel and concrete, two very hard to abate industries. So what we see is that there are technological solutions. And so my role involves evaluating what technical solutions make the most sense from both the technical feasibility perspective, but also financial or economic feasibility. And I think this optimism that you can do it and you just need to figure out which solutions are best has changed the way society views these industries, that it is possible to decarbonize them, and we're on this trajectory to make it happen. And one example of that is for us to put on the market the first net zero carbon captured cement, and that will be the first one at scale in the world, which will come from Brevik, Norway, and it's through carbon capture that we can really achieve that final net zero carbon footprint. It's innovations like this that show the world that these innovations will transform our industries, and we will reach net zero.
Yeah, does it feels even in the time that we've been operating, which is only 4 years, I remember hearing about that Brevik project. It's probably one of the first ones that people pointed out to me as something significant that was emerging. It's amazing to think that that is shortly, hopefully, going to be the kind of first product to market. But that kind of leads me into my next question, really, which is, Heidelberg Materials, you in your board and leadership role, are you seeing a demand pull for this? Are you seeing in your value chain either the customer companies promoting the role of sustainability, promoting demand for these kinds of products? I know the role and the product are different, but in a way they signal similar things, right? So are you seeing that across the value chain now?
Yeah, we certainly do. We see a strong pull from customers, from partners, and we're working with different players in the value chain. So we're not on these very sustainable, innovative products where we want to make lighthouse projects. So, for example, the first building which we will build with Evo Zero or Net Zero cement is the Nobel Center in Sweden, in Stockholm, Sweden. And we need these kinds of lighthouse projects to show that it's possible. And so there are many thought leading companies which want to play a leading role in implementing these kinds of new solutions. So we see certainly a pull, but it also requires engagement. So we have what's called our Sustainability Academy, where we meet with our customers in all of our countries. We're spread over 50 countries globally. And we have these sessions where we explain our sustainability program and about our sustainable revenues. So we have the target to reach 50% sustainable revenues by 2030, and that's either through carbon reduction of 30% versus a standard product, or circularity, and that means 30% less material or 30% recycled materials. So driving those sustainable solutions, educating the customers on what's possible, and bringing everyone along is really critical. But certainly seeing more of a pull than having to do a push.
It's interesting setting a target around sustainable revenues, because as I think about that, I can totally imagine how that actually really draws in attention from all sorts of roles in the business, versus when you make it purely about a percentage emission change. I imagine in a way there are, parts of the sales team or other groups where they're like, well, I can't affect that, whereas when you make a revenue goal, it really pulls a kind of a broader swathe of people in the organization into that challenge and opportunity and target. Amazing.
Exactly. And for me, it's important not just to have the sustainable revenues target to be able to represent how the portfolio is shifting globally, but also to have the stories of how we've made individual customers more sustainable. So what we do is use storytelling to explain, for a certain customer, we solved a certain problem which saved either materials or CO2, and share that, so that it makes it much more memorable, the journey, and more concrete, so to speak.
And just I asked a very bad Alex Cameron question where I conflated two things at the same time. And I was asking about the value chain, but also, are you seeing those senior sustainability roles? Are you seeing sustainability at the board level in the value chain? So from your perspective, are you seeing that enough? Are you seeing customers, suppliers also kind of mirroring the work that Heidelberg is doing in terms of, getting real seniority of decision making linked to sustainability?
Yeah, well, As we change from more of a commodity business to this differentiated, sustainability focused business, we find that we engage with different people at the customer. So it's not just the procurement officer that we deal with, but we tend to also deal with the sustainability officer who's driving corporate targets, but then using them to link to different commercial and procurement roles in the company. So the conversation with other companies has become much more strategic. What I do notice is that chief sustainability officer roles often are not as connected to the business. And I think this is a critical next step that we as sustainability professionals need to do. We need to be involved in the business, driving value, and that will allow us to be much more integrated in the decision making, the strategy, and the success of the company.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank our production partner and sponsor, Jano Media, for their support in delivering the Decarb Connect podcast. Over the last few years, they've helped us to facilitate great conversations that connect us with our audience, and their skills and expertise mean that we get to concentrate exclusively on generating the content, the conversations that engage, inform, and inspire. Okay, well, let me sort of change tack a little bit. We talked briefly about the demand pull for decarbonisation and more sustainable product. But how do we go about creating more of that? How do the colleagues in the cement and construction sector, how do the broader kind of industrial community, how do they go about driving that market? Because ultimately, all the incentives in the world get you so far, but the market has to exist for these products for the bulk of activity to happen. So how do we do that?
Yeah, well, about 40% of concrete is sold to, for government projects. So it's very important that we have, public procurement policies which specify both carbon reduction and circularity. So that's really the starting point. And we have a lot of discussions with different legislative bodies and the EU. So I was recently at a trilateral meeting with ministers of Germany, Italy, and France to discuss this very topic. How do we ensure that there's a pull, and that we make sure that things like the Green Deal come to life, that we really see more procurement of low carbon products, and we have to make sure the standards allow these more innovative products to be sold, because what we find is that we're actually limited in some cases by not being able to put very innovative products on the market which don't yet fit the standards. So that we have to make sure that we go through a process that involves various stakeholders, like the legislators, the standard making bodies, the customers. And it's a very collaborative effort to actually to get these projects underway and to create that overall pull.
I was interested that you had also mentioned earlier, the idea of like the Nobel building, whatever that's going to be finally called. I think actually for some buyers, I think sometimes there's confusion about what is actually available or when things are going to be available as well. Like we talk sometimes to the buyers of materials such as cement, concrete, who just seem to think it's many years off, many decades off, and aren't really clued in to the fact that this stuff is, it is coming to market. So I think those key projects are obviously going to be a big part of that storytelling, to reflect back on something you said, and that messaging around it as well.
Exactly. It's really important to get the news out with these kinds of lighthouse projects, to create more visibility of what's possible. And we have these examples of very sustainable products around the world. And we try to see, for example, in the US, you can use, and Netherlands, you can use 100% recycled aggregates in your concrete. In countries like France, you can use 10 or 20%. And it's about changing those standards and getting the word out what's possible and because it has to do also with application properties. Everyone wants safe buildings constructed in a way which is durable and according to standards. And in that way, we have to make sure that we have proof cases to show that it's possible. I've one example. A wind farm was built in Northern Europe, and we wanted to convince the customer to have a low carbon concrete for the base of the wind farm, which is an application which requires a lot of strength. And typically, high strength concrete has the highest carbon footprint. And so what we did is we installed sensors into those concrete bases to monitor the strength over time. And through this kind of engagement with the customer, gaining confidence with the customer to show that you can use alternative solutions, which will then be fit for purpose and meet the requirements in terms of strength.
That's interesting, because again, very neatly, thank you, leads me into my next question, which is about how we engage, how organizations engage with customers and in it differently. I mean, I'm thinking of an example of one of the metals sector companies that we work with, and one of the things that they have needed to do with their low carbon materials is actually really subvert the sales and distribution chain. They were finding that trying to sell through the regular channels perhaps was diluting or obscuring the message about what was available. And they actually now are increasingly going direct to a big buyer, like a big retailer developing a new site or something. They will go direct rather than through the channel. Is that common? Is that something you're seeing? I don't know what your perspective is on that. Do you think, what do you make of that?
And that is exactly the transformation that we're going through. So in this transformation from commodity to sustainable differentiated product, we need to work with different companies, different parts of these new customers. And we have to redefine how we engage across the value chain. So it's a totally different conversation. And we find that creating a format to engage with these companies. So, for example, in different construction conferences or the opportunities created through COP or the World Business Council, looking for like-minded companies to have these discussions with. This landscape is totally changing, but that meant that we also had to change our internal organization. So because of the complexity also involved in these sustainability claims, it was important to build this commercial team centrally. So traditionally, we've had our sales teams much more local, based in the countries. And concrete is actually quite a local product. It's different in each country depending on the raw materials you have and the standards and the requirements. But with this shift to more sustainable products, we've set up a global team which is very knowledgeable on sustainability claims, the best innovations, so that we can spread this and have a knowledge sharing, not just among our company, but also among our customers.
Well, we've been talking about one big lever for decarbonisation and sustainability, which is that demand pull, the customer. The other big lever, slightly more contentious one maybe, is around carbon pricing. So, how do you see carbon pricing maturing, developing? I mean, certainly here in the UK, there's been a lot of questions about it since we separated from the EU, obviously. A lot to take in there. What's your perspective on it and what you expect to see in that?
About carbon pricing, maybe I just reflect a little bit on how we decarbonize and where carbon pricing comes into play. So when we decarbonize, we look at the product lever, so finding replacements for cement, because the carbon emissions come from the reaction itself. So if you can avoid cement, that is the first lever in decarbonization. The second lever is in our processes, so using more bio-based fuels or alternative fuels, so we can actually use a lot of waste. We can use tires, municipal waste, and use that as an energy feedstock alternative to coal or natural gas. And the third lever is the carbon capture. And the carbon capture is really to eliminate the unavoidable emissions, as I was mentioning, and reach full decarbonization. And that's where the carbon pricing comes into play, because carbon capture is extremely expensive to implement. It requires essentially a chemical factory alongside your cement factory. And we rely a lot on funding for that. But in order to make the business case work, it's not just about getting some funding to support that transition, but also having a carbon price that we can make the business case work and creating the market. So we think about these three levers: funding, carbon price, and market. On the carbon price, right now, the carbon price is quite low. And when we think about a business case, we have to think about the year 2030, because the timeline for building these sites, rebuilding these factories, is several years, because it requires a lot of engagement in where are you going to store the material? Do you have to build a pipeline? Can you store it locally? How do you? Which technology will you pick? Which partners are you going to work with on carbon capture? So there's so many questions to be answered leading up to the construction, which is it's a several year trajectory. And so when we think about carbon pricing, we have to take a long-term perspective, and it's critical that the carbon price increases over the next years in order to make many of these business cases work.
Yes, I've always been interested that Heidelberg was kind of early into the piloting and demonstration of carbon capture projects. And I know that's been a big part of actually carbon capture as a field of interest, being able to prove how that value chain of all the partners coming together works, was because you were able to provide plants and sites and project capabilities in Canada, I think in the US, in Europe, of course, as we've heard. What is it about Heidelberg, do you think, that has meant that as a global business, you've really jumped ahead of so many other companies in the willingness to step up to these things? What is it about the makeup of the business that drives that, do you think?
Yeah, Heidelberg Materials recognized early on that we will need carbon capture in order to make fully decarbonized cement. So it is incredibly important that we figure this out from a technology perspective. So we invested really early on in pilot activities and different technology testing to figure out what's possible. And we see a big variety of technologies, where the carbon gets captured, what kind of technology is used, how much energy is required. And what we've noticed in our gaining maturity on the topic is it's incredibly important to find the right partners, because we need pipelines, we need storage facilities, we need the right engineering companies to work with. So we were quite early in developing that whole network of how to make it happen. And now it's become incredibly important strategically to the company, and we've set a target of 10 million tons of captured CO2 by 2030, and we're really driving that. And in fact, all of our employees have a bonus related to CO2 reduction. So it's really alive in the company, and CO2 reduction in terms of all three pillars is high priority.
Well, look, we kind of came into this conversation talking about how sustainability as a function has changed over the last decade. But what's your feeling when you look at maybe the next couple of years for you, the next 5 to 10 years for the function? What do you think is next? What would you expect a role like yours to look like, or to be behaving like, in another 10 years' time?
Well, what I hope is that other companies follow suit, that they really bring sustainability to the board and make the role broad, so that it encompasses also the business aspects of sustainability. So, and I think it's a bit tricky to find the right people to manage sustainability as the sustainability leaders move up in the company, because it requires different skills. And moving away from the pure sustainability expertise and having a much more entrepreneurial mindset, engagement mindset, and working across the company and also with external stakeholders. So, and I think it's also about giving up a bit of the ownership, because traditionally the sustainability department has handled, for example, all of the reporting, but now we see that collaboration with the finance department is so important, because we can really use a lot of the processes that have been so well established in the financial community related to internal controls, getting a high accuracy of data and timeliness of data. And it's also about working across the company in a different way to also see that the right expertise is used to address the growing needs of sustainability progress reporting.
Well, I think, you've talked about lighthouse projects, but I think your role at board level is almost like a lighthouse role, isn't it? It's showing what to other companies, not just in your sector, but across your value chains and in industries that behave like, yours behaves, what that role really can achieve for them. So I'm very interested to see where you take it next. But thank you so much for joining us today, Nicola. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Alex.
At Jano Media, we recognise that great content has the power to create impactful and positive change for lives and society. Whether that's video, live streams, photography or podcasts, partnering with us will enable you to harness the power of content to engage, inform and inspire. Reach out to us today.